This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. For as little as $1 a month, you'll know you're keeping this endeavor afloat, and plus, you'll get our professional electronic magazine. A few of our patrons who sponsor this podcast are Harry Wheeler, Shannon Oliveira, and Michael Hyde. You can learn more about our Patreon page, as well as find everything about the Human Restoration Project at humanrestorationproject.org and on Twitter at HumResPro. In this episode, Chris sits down with Michael J. Crawford, co-founder of EdSpace.Live, a new social media platform aimed at helping teachers connect in a more meaningful way than Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. EdSpace.Live is currently in development with an expected release in November.
So my name is Michael Crawford. I am the co-founder of EdSpace, the social learning network for the world of education. EdSpace is a platform designed to help educators of all kinds, from teachers to superintendents, principals, people in and around education, to be able to find the people and conversations that they need, to be able to find those as quickly and easily as possible. There are a lot of places online to find lesson plans and activities and different kinds of resources for your classroom or your teaching, but there is not a great place for teachers to get together online and be able to actually connect with one another, see one another's faces, hear their voices, and get the kind of support that they need to do a really difficult job. So I have worked at the intersection of education and entrepreneurship for the last, 2019, call it 7 years or so. Worked for the Kauffman Foundation, worked for the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, and really was interested in the ways in which entrepreneurship and the process of entrepreneurship can be an educational experience. I joined the team at Real World Scholars, which is a San Diego-based nonprofit that helps classrooms start and run businesses. I joined that team over 2 years ago, really trying to help them build out their partnerships and also think differently, or think kind of more expansively about their strategy and the way that they utilize the technology that they afforded people, some funding that they provided, resources. And so sort of fast forward through that work, we recognized at Real World Scholars that one of the main things that were holding some of our teachers back, the teachers that we worked with across the country, one of the things that was holding them back is just the amount of support and kind of community that they needed to be effective and successful and sort of flourishing in their space. We would provide some of that, but we also recognize that some of the teachers, even with our support, weren't getting the kind of support that they needed. And so we thought, well, wait a minute, why is there no existing solution to this problem? And so we kind of picked our heads up, started looking around, started doing a lot of research into other platforms, communities, LMSs, just different ways that teachers could try to connect virtually, because many of them don't necessarily work in a school where the staff are particularly supportive, and also things like conferences are often cost prohibitive. Not a lot of teachers get the opportunity to go and rub shoulders with other folks like them, and so it's made sense to us that there should be a virtual place where this can happen. And when we picked our heads up and looked around, there just wasn't. And so the idea for EdSpace was kind of born from there, and it's been, we've been in development for EdSpace for over a year, and really been kind of researching for almost 2.
And the concept of the platform is really interesting. I know that you are looking at to be like a conference space, but also like a traditional social media space in the sense of like talking to one another and connecting with one another. Could you walk me through, for the user, what that looks like on their end to be using EdSpace.Live?
Absolutely. So you're definitely right to think of it as kind of a virtual conference space. It does have similarities to some existing social media platforms, and then there's some other elements that are new and kind of plucked from other places. And so a user will register, they'll sign in. It is email password protected. You can't just, unlike Twitter where you don't necessarily need to have a login to see what's going on, you do within EdSpace. And so you'll sign in. The first thing you'll see is your live guide, which is effectively your dashboard, your home base. In that live guide will be channels. So if you're familiar with Slack or other places that have this sort of like topic specific or discussion specific spaces. So within your live guide, there'll be some channels for you that are auto generated when you sign up, that are private to your school, and some will also be public to the space. You'll also see at the very top a place called Guides, where there are going to be your favorite podcasts, your favorite books, your favorite blogs, other topics related to teaching, like I'm a first-year teacher, or how to engage with parents. And so you'll go into these different guides, and there'll be other channels there, and you can grab these channels and put them into your live guide so that you really customize your home base. And within each of these channels, it'll kind of resemble YouTube in a way, where there'll be videos, but these won't be videos that are kind of highly curated and created and produced. Instead, there'll be videos that more resemble something like a Snapchat, where you can jump on, you can ask a quick question. Maybe you just got out of a great session at a conference and you're reflecting, I just saw Ken Robinson speak and he said this thing about passion that I had never heard of. Has anybody ever heard of this, right? And so there'll be a number of these videos from other teachers just like you that will allow you to kind of see their face, hear their voice, and jump into the conversations that are happening. One of the main things that we're really excited about is a feature on EdSpace called noise control. And so, imagine jumping into the first year teacher channel and there being 1,000 posts, 1,000 short video posts from teachers across the country. Nobody has time to look through all of those 1,000, and it's not going to be clear right away which ones are the most appropriate and sort of relevant for you. And so using noise control, you can kind of think of it like filters. You'll be able to say, okay, I want to see just teachers from within 50 miles from me, just teachers who teach at high schools, who teach at rural high schools, right? And you check a few boxes. And as you're doing that, the 1,000 goes from 1,000 to 500 to 200 to 17, right? And so it really helps you to kind of customize who you're hearing from. And you can use that noise control feature across any of the channels. And so you can really kind of dial in who you're trying to hear from and who you're trying to connect with.
That's really cool. I like that feature a lot. I like that concept of especially connecting the local with the global, like being able to connect with people directly around you, because I think that is very limiting in the current social media space. And I mean, this might be kind of an obvious answer, but what would be the reason why someone would transition to EdSpace.Live as opposed to using like Twitter has a pretty big ed community, as well as Instagram and to an extent Facebook as well. Why would people want to switch?
Sure. I think there's a few reasons. First, all those other platforms that you mentioned aren't built for educators, right? So if you jump into Twitter or you jump onto Instagram, it takes work to go find the communities and the hashtags and the people that are actually the people that you're there for. EdSpace is built for and frankly by the hundreds of conversations and inputs and ideas from educators. And so that when you're going to EdSpace, it's for education people only, period. So that's the first thing. Second, some of these other platforms like a Twitter, like an Instagram, if you spend enough time and invest enough energy, you can figure out kind of where the people are and how to find them. But oftentimes who you see are only the people that the algorithms provide, right? So if you jump into Twitter, you're going to see the people with thousands and thousands and thousands of followers, people who have figured out kind of how to navigate Twitter effectively. You're not going to hear from the people who might be just like you, who are just starting out in social media, who are, could be a first, second, third year teacher. It's not easy to find those folks because of the way the algorithms work. On EdSpace, because of the noise control filters, it's easy. Because it's siphoned off, because these channels exist where you can go and just find the people you're looking for, it'll save you time, it'll save you energy. And the third thing I would say is it kind of related to the idea of followers. On EdSpace, there are no view counts, no followers, no followings, retweet counts. We really tried to strip out all of the vanity metrics, all the popularity contest elements that make some of these other platforms, just sort of exhausting. Like, it takes a lot of time and effort to build up a following, to make it so that when you have something to say or something to share, other people will actually see it. On EdSpace, there are no sort of popularity metrics. You can't go and see how many people are interested in your work. By starring you on EdSpace is what we're calling it. So it doesn't have this effect, which means that any channel that you go to, any conversation you're part of, your voice is as equal as any other person's voice. We're trying to level the playing field, trying to democratize the conversation, is what we're saying. And so these other platforms don't have those elements to them. And maybe I was going to stop at 3, but the fourth thing I would say, and I'll stop here, is that on Instagram, it's certainly image based, and you can have videos. On Twitter, it's primarily text based, but you can have videos. EdSpace is a video-based platform. There's ways that you can just use text if you're not necessarily ready to jump on video, but so much of communication is nonverbal. And so if you're just typing out 280 characters on a tweet, that comes across one way. It's sort of stripped of context. We can't totally hear your tone. If I don't know who you are, I don't know sort of the voice that you're using. Whereas if on EdSpace, a short 10-second clip, you get to see your face, you get to hear your voice. It allows for a deeper level of connection that can begin to build the kind of relationships that we know teachers want and need.
Yeah, there's a lot that you're saying that I really appreciate, especially the algorithmic part of it. Something that really bothers me about that is not, in addition to all the issues with entrepreneurship that come with like trying to capitalistically take over the algorithm, there's also just, you kind of get caught in your bubble. It shocks me because I have multiple Twitter accounts, like my personal one, the HRP one, and when I switch between them, the conversations are drastically different, even though, I'm the same person. The things that I'm doing aren't really that much different. And it's crazy just to look at because you can go on those websites and see like what other people's Twitter feeds look like based off their account. It's crazy how much different their worldview is based off of what they think the world is like.
Absolutely.
And so I guess the next question would be, just how are you going to go about ensuring that people adopt the platform? So to give that a little bit more context, part of the pull towards social media is like the fame or the claps or the likes. There's a lot of dopamine influxers in there in order to make sure that you use them. And also there are some other people in this space. Like I don't use it often, but there's like Fishbowl, the app that where you can talk to people professionally, and it's aimed at teachers. So how are you going to get enough people to transition from what already exists to ensure that people, it's kind of like everybody has to go along with it, in order to make it something worthwhile?
It does. No question about it. If people aren't willing or able to share, then the platform doesn't exist. Because the platform because EdSpace requires users to generate the content, the conversations, the engagement. If they don't do that, then there is nothing. There is nothing there. So no question about it. So we have a couple ideas around how we're going to attract different educators to the platform. So in our work with Real World Scholars, we have been fortunate enough to be connected to a number of networks of schools around the country. So the folks at Big Picture Learning, New Tech Network, Altitude Learning, there's a handful of networks of schools that are doing really dynamic things, who are seeing EdSpace as a way to not only immerse their teachers in sort of a broader global PLN, but also to be able to use EdSpace within their network. So right now, for example, there are schools within the same network who are, maybe a few states away, who don't have great ways to share the learnings that are happening, even though they're within the same, they're in the same family. And maybe there's an email listserv, or maybe there's, a sort of an LMS that's really text-based, but there isn't a way for these folks who are doing very similar work under the same, on the same team, to be able to communicate. So we see, and the feedback that we've gotten from networks is that they see a big use for this just internally for their team. So that's kind of one, that's one approach. The other is, right now there is no great place. So let me ask you this: do you listen to podcasts? You have a podcast, so I would imagine you listen to podcasts. So right now you listen to a podcast and you don't necessarily know who among your friends, your family, your networks, the people that are, on the subway with you or at the restaurant with you, who else listens to that same podcast. There's no great place online, once you hear a podcast episode, to go and talk about that podcast episode. There's, the best thing right now that exists, there's a couple things. There could be a Facebook group, which is an option. It's text-based. It's sort of closed. There could be the reviews on iTunes where you can kind of get in there's a comment string maybe. Some of these podcasters do have websites where you can go and leave some comments, but there's no great place. You listen to Tim Ferriss or you listen to, Freakonomics or any other education podcast, and you have no idea who else is listening to it. And, imagine if you could go to a place, you could listen to a podcast, and then you could go to the channel on EdSpace for that podcast and talk with other people who listen to it about it. And so right now we have some good relationships with folks doing podcasts, with people who have written books and people who are on blogs to say, hey, send your readers, send your audience to EdSpace and begin to have a dialogue around what you just heard or what you just read. And so we've talked to a handful of podcast hosts, authors, et cetera, to do that. And so they're excited too. So those are just two different ways that we're thinking. We've been also part of supporting conferences. So, I mentioned before, it's sort of a virtual conference potentiality here. And so, imagine the schools will send one representative to a conference. That person will go have a great time, maybe just incredible energy. They'll come back from their conference and they'll give the, 30-minute PowerPoint presentation to the staff who wasn't there, who doesn't have any context, who just is like, okay, thanks, Chris. I'm glad you had a good time, but we need to get back to work, right? And so imagine if, rather than just sending your one representative, everybody back in your school could also be sort of virtually participating in that conference and not only watching you at that conference interact with others, but tune into conference channels and be able to engage. That when you come back, they're already kind of on board. They've been paying attention. They maybe have contributed to the conference. And so we're having conversations with conferences also to begin thinking about how they'll join. So that's kind of one angle to answer your question. I think the other angle that you're primarily interested in is what will keep people coming back? Why will they continue to use EdSpace? And there's a couple things. To your point about, the dopamine, because we strip those out, we are, sort of fortunately, unable to take advantage of some of those addictive elements of other platforms. I think the main reason that people will come back to EdSpace is that they have easily and quickly found their people, found their tribe, found their conversation in a way that other platforms are just not doing it. I check Twitter a bunch of times a day to see what I have a handful of lists, and there are people who are sharing things, and I'm always interested in what they're up to, but I don't necessarily connect with them. I just sort of follow their things. I think if I had a place where I could go where, I could see their faces and I could chime in with my own voice and we could begin having these kind of video-based conversations, that's going to be something that if it feeds my professional needs, I'm going to keep coming back to. And that's the feedback that we've gotten so far from teachers. We have a handful of folks that are in the app already, be sort of pre-beta. And that's one of the things that they've said is that they love being able to actually see the people that, maybe they follow on Twitter or maybe they've just met, but love being able to see and hear them and want to contribute to those conversations.
Not to self promo on my own podcast, but we do a monthly summit, and we just started doing this where we basically invite people on for a video chat. And it's kind of taken the place of any kind of Twitter chat that we've done, quote unquote, because Twitter chats just don't make any sense to me. The concept of using a social media app that's meant to be broadcasting to a ton of people to have a dialogue with groups of people makes virtually no sense. So when we have those video conversations, the level of conversation is so much deeper and meaningful. It would take the place of thousands of chat messages in just a 1 hour span.
Totally.
So I'm completely with you on the video front there and the ability to connect with others and find them too. The education world is very, people are very passionate in the education world and many people have very different ideas. What are your thoughts on how you're going to moderate it and how it's going to work with censorship and trolling? Because just like in politics, one person's viewpoint of education might be seen as absolutely absurd to someone else. I think about communities like unschoolers or people who are, and not that I believe this, but believe there should be an end to the public education system. Some really far out there views, but they're not necessarily malicious. It's just, it's a very different viewpoint than, others. What are your thoughts on moderation, censorship, managing a social media platform, and like free speech and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, great question. Obviously absolutely relevant in these days, and relevant in the ways in which people are engaging in social media politically and also in education. There are, kind of real combative, for lack of a better term, engagements happening on Twitter in the education world as we speak. And so one of the things that we are very serious about is this democratization of the conversation, of allowing various viewpoints to be able to occupy space, because we believe in that. At the same time, we know that things like people like trolls exist, and that there are oftentimes not people who are engaging in these spaces in ways that they shouldn't be, or in a form that they shouldn't be as well. And so the way that EdSpace will handle those is, we as EdSpace admin won't be in every single channel moderating every single comment. Within EdSpace, there are ways for the broader user base to report and to flag both content and users. So they'll flag somebody or flag something as appropriate. They can leave a little message for us. We get on the admin side, we get a message right away that says, check this out, a direct link to whatever it is said or whoever it is they are, and we'll be able to address it that way. So we really are leaning on the community to kind of self-police. We'll have a series of rules of engagement for EdSpace that will help to clearly articulate the kinds of interactions and engagements and speech and things that are appropriate for the space. And then we will support users as they self-police. Over time, we're anticipating being able to allow individual users or organizations to kind of own or host or moderate their own space within EdSpace. So HRP, for example, you could have your own guide, and within your own guide, you could have your own channels that you decide which ones are private, which ones are public, how the particular permissions work there. And so when that happens, some of that responsibility, some of those controls will shift over to the moderator, the owner of that space. But in the short term, when we launch in beta, users will be able to flag, they'll be able to report, and then we'll handle those on the admin side.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds really cool to me. It's basically like educational Slack, or any kind of those things where you get to have that space. Is that? I realize I missed a huge question. Is that the way that you're planning on monetizing the platform?
Great question. And it's a question we always get, and it's a question that we are, the answer is often, I think, probably unsatisfying for folks. We're still exploring that. So one of the things that we don't want to do is sell user data like many of the other platforms. We don't want it to be sort of a Facebook or Twitter-based thing where you're working for the company, essentially. Just by engaging, you're making them money. We don't want to do that and sell people's data. And we also don't want teachers to have to pay for this out of their own pockets. They're already paying, I think it's something like $200 to $300, I think, out of their own pocket, might even be more, every year for classroom supplies and even professional learning, professional development opportunities out of their own pocket. And so we don't want that to be the case. And so we're actually exploring a few different ways to begin monetizing. We have a runway right now with the funding that we have to get us through the next school year, so this 19-20 school year, and by that point, then we'll have figured out a way to keep it going beyond that.
Cool, awesome. Well, thank you, Michael, for talking about this. I think it's going to be it's a cool experiment. I hope it's successful, and I think it'll be really interesting for us.
Absolutely. So we are on the internet at www.EdSpace.Live. We are also on Twitter at EdSpace.Live. You can download the app right now in kind of an early form. Depending on when this drops, EdSpace could have been launched in beta or maybe not. But either way, it's in the Android, it's in Google Play, and it's in the Apple App Store. So you can find it there. Otherwise, EdSpace.Live for all information. You reach me. I'm on Twitter at MJCraw, and you can send me an email, Michael at EdSpace.Live. And that's the best way to do it.
Thanks again for listening to Things Fall Apart from the Human Restoration Project. If you enjoyed the show, feel free to give us a shout out on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Just search Human Restoration Project. We always love to hear your thoughts. And if you're interested in learning more about progressive education, visit our website at humanrestorationproject.org. Appreciate your listen and continued mission to restore humanity together.